Hi there, folks. Welcome to the program. This, of course, is Stinchfield, the podcast. Look, the title of the podcast today is something you already know. It's called Truth Suppressed. And we see truth being suppressed at every level of our federal government, quite frankly, state government, all the way down to city government. We have bureaucrats all across the country that do not want you to know the truth. And I think this is specifically true when it comes to our sick care system. You know, I've stopped calling it the healthcare system because I'm convinced they want you sick. They make no money off of you being healthy. So we call it the sick care system. And because it's the sick care system, they suppress the truth. When did all of this surface? Of course, when it comes to the vaccines. COVID. But then I went back and I started doing some research on this. You know, the flu shot, I used to get the flu shot every year, no problem. I didn't really have any side effects. I don't know if it stopped me from getting the flu or not. I tend to think no. But I go back and find a study in 2006. I'm going to play you a report from Cheryl Atkinson, who turns out to be a great reporter. She was on the forefront of exposing government corruption back in 2006 that showed there was like no benefit of the flu shot. You think the government wanted you to know all about that? No. Did we ever hear anything about that after 2006? No. So this is happening now when it comes to just about every vaccine, which is really pretty wild, certainly with the COVID shot. And again, as I mentioned, everything we know about government from the Russian collusion hoax and beyond. So we'll talk about Truth Suppressed today. The CEO of the wellness company is with me, Peter Gallulli. He always has great insight on all of these things. Before we get to him, I want to tell you about the wellness company, the sponsor of today's podcast. You know, I always tell you, I always ask you, I should say, do you have one of these? These are the prescription medical kits. Inside here, prescription medications you need to keep you and your family safe. If you don't have one of these, quite frankly, folks, you're not prepared. You know, Dr. McCullough always makes fun of me. He says, oh, Grant, you're such a prepper. I am a prepper in some respects, not as good as some others, but I want to be ready for anything. So I have water, I have food, I have ammunition, I've got extra firearms, I've got power supply. And yes, I have prescription medications, handy guidebook in here as well. So many products at the wellness company that they offer up. I urge you to peruse the website. Just go to twc.health/Grant, twc.health/Grant. Use the promo code GRANT for 10% off, and you'll be ready for anything. That I promise you. All right, folks, let's get the show started, and then we'll bring in Peter Gallulli.
Uncensored and unapologetic. This is Stinchfield. Here's your host, Grant Stinchfield.
All right, welcome, everybody. So Peter Gallulli, as I mentioned, is our guest. Peter, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me back, Grant.
All right, Truth Suppressed. What do you think? It's a pretty simple title, but makes a lot of sense.
I mean, the flu shot, Grant, is the poster child of truth suppression. And I mean, we've been basically brainwashed. Even myself, I think in the last 2 weeks, I've gotten 3 or 4 text messages from former pharmacies that I've gotten a prescription at, encouraging me to go to them to get my annual flu shot. And we've kind of got to the point where many Americans, or at least prior to COVID, wouldn't question that. They would just do it in the grocery store, do it in the pharmacy, wouldn't think twice. But the truth is out there, Grant, and I think it's actually at our fingertips. So I don't know if you've done this, Grant, and I know we're going to talk about Cheryl Atkinson's reporting in a moment, which is, imagine 2 decades ago. Yeah. But even today, if you go and type into Google CDC flu shot effectiveness, the first link that shows up is going to bring you to the CDC's website on the flu shot, and there's going to be a chart. You scroll down the page and you look at that chart, and you're going to find something very interesting. The fact is, the CDC themselves openly acknowledge that in their very best years, the flu shot is only moderately effective. And by moderately, I'm meaning around 50%. In some years, we're down in the 20s. And let's also define effectiveness here, because I think that's an important measure that we should put a definition around. So the flu shot is created every summer, and it's created based on what the CDC believes at that time to be the predominant strains of influenza. There it is. right? And you can see that chart, right? So last year they had a stellar year at 56% effectiveness. For years past, right, we're well under 50. Some years we're in 30 or even lower, right? Oddly enough, you'll notice that there's no data during COVID.
Look, it goes down. Yeah, during COVID, not enough data to compare because everything was coming back COVID and no flu which just made no sense. But I'm looking at this. This is a great chart you had me pull up here. So you go back to 2009, 56% effective. Then 2011, 60%, and then it just starts to drop 47, all the way down to 2022, 36%, and then as you mentioned, it goes back up to 56%. So you're barely over 50% effective on some years. Most years you're well under 50%.
Right.
The risk reward on this to me doesn't make much sense.
Well, it gets worse than that, Grant. Like, number one, there's no mention on this page of adverse events, right? Which we all know that there are. And flu shot does have adverse events, just like every vaccine. My own grandmother, she died at, I believe, 82 from a flu shot. She received a flu shot, was hospitalized, and passed away. She had a very weak immune system. So it happens. Secondly, effectiveness. What does that actually mean? Well, the CDC is guessing every summer what they think the predominant flu strains are going to be that year. So when you see effectiveness, you're not actually looking at a patient-driven outcome. It's just measuring how much of the predicted strains of flu that year they had actually captured in the flu shot. It doesn't actually tell you whether or not that flu shot was effective in an individual patient population who may or may not have compromised immune systems, like the elderly, who they really push flu shot vaccines on, right? So this is just their own measurement of how good they were at guessing what flu strains would be around that year. It doesn't actually map to any real outcome in terms of health benefits.
So you had mentioned Cheryl Atkinson, who's, turned out to be a great reporter. She's basically been canceled by the mainstream media. She's got to go out and do much of the work on her own. Well, this was when she was working for CBS as one of their investigative reporters. This goes back to 2006. Let me play this flu shot report. Goes right into what you were saying, goes into the chart that we were talking about, and yet nobody really wants to report on any of this, and this is, as you mentioned, 20 years ago. Here it is.
Here's what scientists have found. Over 20 years, the percentage of seniors getting flu shots increased sharply from 15% to 65%. It stands to reason that flu deaths among the elderly should have taken a dramatic dip, making an X graph like this. Instead, flu deaths among the elderly continue to climb. It was hard to believe, so researchers at the National Institutes of Health set out to do a study adjusting for all kinds of factors that could be masking the true benefits of the shots. But no matter how they crunched the numbers, they got the same disappointing result. Flu shots had not reduced deaths among the elderly. It's not what health officials hoped to find. NIH wouldn't let us interview the study's lead author, so we went to...
All right, so I'm going to stop right there. So first, NIH wouldn't let us interview the lead author. One, it seems like nothing's changed. We've got a vaccine that's not working, and the government doesn't want to talk about it.
Same story, different year. I mean, what else can we say about this, right? It sounds just like a small dress rehearsal for COVID. But it's interesting. How far did you have to dig to find that news article, Grant? Like, this should be talked about every year in flu season, right?
Yeah, and nobody's doing it. So here, she does such great work. So she does find somebody who took part in the study. Just so happens that person doesn't actually work for the federal government, so he's happy to talk about this. Let's roll it.
Boston, and found the only co-author not employed by NIH, Dr. Tom Reichert.
We realized that we had incendiary material.
Dr. Reichert says they thought their study would prove vaccinations had helped.
We were trying to do something mainstream, that's for sure.
Were you surprised?
Astonished.
Did you check the data a couple of times to make sure?
Well, even more than that, we've looked at other countries now, and the same is true.
That study, soon to be published, finds the same poor results in Australia, France, Canada, and the UK. And other new research stokes the idea that decades of promoting flu shots in seniors the big
the shingles vaccine. And everybody says, "Oh, Grant, the last thing you want is to get shingles." And believe me, I don't want shingles. I hear it's completely painful. But from what I'm told, you don't die from shingles, right? It will pass. The vaccine, from what I'm told from some of the wellness doctors, is that there's some pretty serious complications to the shingles vaccine. Doesn't happen a lot, but when it happens, it can be awful serious. So do I want to take the risk of that to something I'm not going to die from? It'll be painful. I'll get through it. Right now, I'm saying I don't want the shingles vaccine.
I don't know about you when you were a child, Grant, but I distinctly remember when Mitch, 2 houses down the street, had chicken pox. My mom made me go play with Mitch all weekend, so I would get chicken pox. I mean, that's really the best way to stay healthy, right? Is to just build up your immune system. I mean, there's no need to vaccinate. And I think your assessment of the situation with the shingles vaccine is absolutely correct, right? It might, maybe, if you're lucky, reduce the severity of symptoms if you even contract shingles. Yeah. But, I mean, the adverse events, right? I mean, that could cost you far, far more. So why take the chance?
Exactly. That's my feelings on it. Now, I was telling you before we came on that your doctors are always right in the thick of things, from Dr. McCullough and Dr. Thorpe and so many of the others. Nicholas Holscher works very closely with Dr. McCullough, and they study all of these adverse reactions and really putting a focus on the COVID shot. I want to play Nicholas because he has issued a warning here about some of the things that he's found. I'll play it for you. I just saw this recently. He was on with Dr. Drew. One of your doctors at the wellness company. So let's listen to Nicholas.
So this is literally the first documented direct evidence of genomic integration of mRNA vaccine genetic material. So we found a stage 4 bladder cancer patient. It was a 31-year-old woman, right? So this is a very rare cancer in this age group. Stage 4 bladder cancer.
Crazy.
Yeah. So she's got this turbo cancer. And so we did some molecular profiling, looked at her circulating tumor DNA, ran some proteomics, what's called multi-omic analysis. So we looked at everything going on, but we identified in the circulating tumor DNA, and the first author of this study is Dr. John Catanzaro of Neo7 Bioscience. In this circulating tumor DNA, in chromosome 19, we identified a chimeric segment of Pfizer Moderna genetic code, part of the spike encoding sequence from the DNA plasmid, was literally integrated in chromosome 19 in a what's called non-safe harbor region.
Hang on. I want to make sure I get this. This was not an encoded DNA from the mRNA. This was a plasmid that had infected or been adulterated in the vaccine. Is that correct?
It appears it is the plasmid because it is a perfect 20-20 base pair match, perfect 20 nucleotide pair match of the Pfizer reference sequence to this sequence in chromosome 19, which is about a 1 in a trillion chance of this being an anomaly. So we do believe it is the DNA residual contamination part of that sequence. It could be from the mRNA getting in there as well and reverse transcribing. We can't really tell exactly,
Right.
but because it
Right.
perfectly matches the plasmid reference sequence published online, that leads us to believe it was from the DNA contamination.
All right, so a lot of scientific talk in there, much of it way over my head. But I guess the end that we should take away from this is from everything they found with the DNA being contaminated, aggressive bladder cancer, stage 4 bladder cancer that I guess they're relating to this mRNA stuff, Peter.
That's exactly right. Without all the scientific jargon, the layman's explanation is that our fears were confirmed. So we were worried that because we were injecting mRNA, which can transcribe within our own cells and alter our genome, that some of this mRNA might get inside cells and cause anomalies that manifest themselves in cancers, right? I mean, we've seen news articles. I know you've talked about it extensively, Grant, but there hasn't been a ton of actual medical causality that's been studied and linked to that. That's starting to come to the forefront now. I suspect this is going to be the first study in a whole series of studies over the next decade about the long-term ramifications of these mRNA vaccines. And look, mRNA is here to stay, at least right now. You know, Pfizer is continuing to invest billions of dollars a year in the platform. Moderna, still very much in business. The big pharmaceutical companies view this as an important therapeutic platform for not only vaccines, but other kind of treatments. So it's really important that we're kind of keeping our heads on a swivel and not only doing our own research, but asking our doctors when they're recommending something, tell me about what this product actually is. How is it being made?
I think so many of us know that there was a problem with the mRNA. We didn't like that. We didn't like this idea for a so-called vaccination. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I know, was in the same camp as that. Is there any push from him to say, hey, we're going to put a pause on mRNA vaccinations?
Well, it's a complicated topic, as most things are in Washington. I have been very encouraged by RFK Jr.'s lifting the vaccine mandates for children in some populations. So we're making forward progress. I think what we have to keep in mind, and this is the hardest part, is that there are very, very entrenched interests and momentum within the federal government. As much as we all would love RFK or President Trump to jump in and snap their fingers and maybe solve all the health problems. Millions of Americans have jobs in these companies. And also, while you and I, Grant, might align on what we believe the scientific truth is, the data is still coming out, right? And I think we probably have the correct answer, but I think it takes much more rigorous and long-term studies to actually have enough evidence to truly put this to bed in the eyes of the federal government.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating stuff. You mentioned Pfizer. The White House is actually coming under quite a bit of fire for bringing Pfizer in and partnering up with Pfizer on a whole host of things. They were in the Oval Office of all people. I understand why people were not happy about this. Dr. Oz was asked about it by Glenn Beck. I'm going to play that for you here in just a moment. But before I do, let me tell people about a product that I just used from the wellness company, and it was great. I went through a total parasite detox, and I used the parasite cleanse from the wellness company. Sold out 3 times. I feel like I have less bloating after this parasite cleanse, and I feel like my mind is cleaner as well. I believe I had parasites. I eat a lot of sushi, and so the chances are I could have most certainly had parasites. More Americans than we think have parasites. You may be one of them. I would recommend going through a total parasite detox. Look at that right there. That is salmon at a grocery store, okay? Absolutely disgusting. Go to twc.health/Grant. Fill out the form. This is mebendazole and ivermectin, FDA approved for human use. And again, as I said, sold out 3 times, back in stock. Mebendazole and ivermectin. You're going to fill out a form at the wellness company. Doctor will call you back. They'll send you this parasite cleanse and go through a total detox like I did. Get the parasites out of your system. When I started reading up about this, looking at this, I was completely disgusted by all of it. So I said, you know what? I'm going through one of these detoxes, and I'm glad I did. twc.health/Grant. Use that promo code GRANT for 10% off. All right, Peter, I have the clip of Glenn Beck asking Dr. Oz about, hey, why do you bring the Pfizer? Which in my mind is really the enemy. Now, I would imagine there's got to be some drugs that Pfizer has on the market that doesn't. So I'm not saying we don't use any drugs, but boy, oh boy, I'm just not a fan of Big Pharma. They're in the Oval Office. We're bellied up with the enemy. Here's Dr. Oz and Glenn Beck asking him about this.
Why Pfizer, for the love of Pete? Why did you have to start with Pfizer? Pfizer just has that bad COVID ring to it. Are they the only ones that are going to do it?
Oh, not at all. In fact, we have another company next week, one the week after, another one the week after. We have them all coming in. Pfizer is a bellwether. A lot of the other pharmaceutical companies look to it for guidance and leadership. Its CEO, Borlia, which that's his image right there, is a leader in the industry. And so when Pfizer was willing to come into the Oval Office and bend the knee and tell the president they understand why he feels so strongly about MFN, and they get the joke and they understand that they need to change their practices. And if we're willing to do what's required to make global pricing fair, it's going to work. Then it sends a signal to every other pharmaceutical industry player that this is the way it's going to have to be. And you know what? It's working. They're all coming in. They were coming in anyway, but now they're rushing in to get involved in the president's program. Our goal is to get every drug possible. We want 95% of all drugs sold in America to be at most favored nation pricing by the time the president has done this wonderful 4 years.
All right, so I love the idea of most favored nation pricing. We can bring the price of drugs down, fine. But I get what Glenn Beck is saying. Why Pfizer? He says Pfizer's a bellwether company. People respect the CEO. What's your response to that answer by Dr. Oz?
It's a complicated answer. Personally, I don't like the government interfering with private corporations, right? I think that's my biggest problem with this whole arrangement, is that the government is essentially partnering, as they use it, with Pfizer and these other companies. And look, Pfizer's getting a tremendous amount of cover. What Dr. Oz probably didn't say is that, Pfizer's going to get sponsoring and coverage from the FDA to run litanies of other biotechnology research platforms. Those include additional advancements in mRNA, which we just spoke about. So I personally don't like it. I think that I would understand why we did it. I think Americans do pay astronomical drug costs, and it's completely backwards, especially considering that America is a leader in pharmaceuticals. And let's face it, not all pharmaceuticals are bad. Millions and millions of lives a year are saved by pharmaceuticals, so we certainly need them. But I just think there was probably more elegant and market-driven ways, let's say, to get the same outcome.
What do you think Pfizer's ultimate goal is? Look, I understand every company needs to have shareholders in mind, and you need to do the best thing possible for your shareholder. In a free market, total free market society, I believe health would benefit because your shareholders are going to benefit when people are getting a great product and remaining healthy and all that. The problem is we've skewed the markets for these guys so much that they don't really have a benefit to provide the best product ever when the government's mandating you buy stuff and the government's buying so much, and it's just like business as usual.
Yeah, the business of pharmaceuticals is kind of a greasy one, Grant. So one of the bigger problems that I see when it comes to the business is that Big Pharma is extremely entrenched within the FDA and the CDC. And the FDA and the CDC are ultimately the people who make the safety calls, the approval, the judgments on these products. So you see constantly, all the time, pharmaceutical executives, they'll leave the pharmaceutical company and take a tour of duty for a couple of years in the CDC or the FDA, or they'll leave the pharmaceutical company and take a tour of duty in a major academic publication that publishes clinical trials, right? There are so many conflicts of interest that it's almost impossible to weed it out without very, very clear legislation. And look, it's not in the big pharma's best interest to have any bill like that pass. So they're incentivized to continue to play nice with whatever administration is in charge, because for them, having that tightness and that closeness to the regulatory bodies is key to their business model.
Yeah, it sure is. I guess in the end, money seemed to have been taken a front seat to public safety. And I just wonder how people in our own government and in some of these pharmaceutical companies live with themselves, because I know they know the truth. We get the truth in bits and pieces now. It's all starting to come out. But these people have to wake up in the morning, look at themselves in the mirror, and know they did so much harm to us. And yet, I guess we're forced to still have to deal with them, like Pfizer.
There was a lot of complaining and whining about 80 years ago when we started pushing out seatbelt laws, and then again when we started pushing out airbag laws. But I don't think anybody, or any automobile manufacturer for that matter, would disagree that those are critical components of safety. And now it's become standard practice. I think part of the issue, though, Grant, is that all of these companies are very scientific and very data driven. Now, when you're able to manipulate the data, and if you look at a lot of these studies, you're looking at extremely marginal increases in life expectancy or whatever metric they're trying to measure when they're getting drugs approved. That's an issue, right? But that's often all it takes to get a drug approved, even if it has a long laundry list of side effects, which are extremely unpleasant. I've talked on this show before. A friend of mine survived cancer, was given a recommendation for a drug that would increase her chance of surviving 5 years by 33%. That sounds great. There's a lot of side effects, but 33%, that's a lot. Turns out her base chance of surviving 5 years was already 97%. So she would take the drug, get the side effects, but only actually realize a 1% increase in her chances of surviving 5 years. But that's the game that the pharmaceutical companies play with the data, right? And they can get drugs approved with that sort of data. And I think their employees too, their employees think, okay, well, the study says it works, so I can sleep at night, right? And they don't actually look under the hood.
Well, look, our own side is guilty of, you hear often what you want to hear. And I guess if you're working inside the pharmaceutical company, that would hold true for them as well. But boy, what an example of a spot when you look at the numbers that maybe this isn't doing us anything other than lining the pockets of somebody else.
Correct.
Peter Gallulli, it's always great to talk to you. Wellness Company, such a great firm. Let me tell people how they can find the Wellness Company, and as always, thank you for coming on the program today.
Thanks for having me, Grant.
Absolutely, of course. All right, folks, let me give you the website again. It's twc.health/Grant. You know, I showed you the first when I told you Dr. McCullough calls me a prepper. This is the other kit. This is the field kit that is the kit of all kits when it comes to prescription medications. Monsters amounts of prescription medications in here. There's steroids in here as well. You got antibiotics, antiparasitics, antivirals in here. My favorite thing in here, which I think everybody should have, is an EpiPen. Especially if you've got kids that are coming over to the house to play and somebody gets stung by a bee, you need an EpiPen. I don't think we ever had one in my household when I was growing up as a kid. I knew kids that had them because they were allergic. But with all the allergies today, and we could do a whole show on why kids are so susceptible to things, the EpiPen in here could be a lifesaver, as to so many other drugs. So twc.health/Grant. Use that promo code GRANT for 10% off, and make sure you and your family are prepared. That's going to do it for us. Stinchfield's Army Rolls. We'll see you on the Real America's Voice show tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. A buddy of mine is going to be camping out in Portland outside the ice facility to see if Portland police treat him the same way they treat the Antifa goons, which is doing nothing to the Antifa goons. So we're going to have a live report from him from Portland tonight on the Real America's Voice show. That's it for us. As I said, Stinchfield's Army rolls. Thanks for watching, everybody.